Well, it's lovely to be with you and to be journeying with you as we learn, reflect, and share about well-being from a Christian perspective. And it seems to be a perfect time to be doing that. Firstly, because this is Advent, the time of waiting, which gives us that possibility of thinking of new ways of understanding how we should live. And the second is because we're all experiencing huge problems in maintaining our well-being on account of the coronavirus pandemic and the implications that has for our daily lives. Now, the first two sessions are going to be a bit of teaching, really, whereas the next three are much more reflective and linked to Advent themes. So I realise that some might prefer the first two, others the next three, but I hope that there's something for everyone in these sessions. I also recognise that we journey at different paces, and that's fine. The key thing is to be moving towards God, both on our separate journeys and together. And that togetherness will be expressed in part through the discussions in the breakout rooms. What I do firmly believe is that God desires us to receive the gift of well-being, and that we'll discover how to maintain it in these difficult times. And my confidence comes from knowing that we have a God who says, ask, seek, and you will find. And so I'm looking forward to what we're going to discover in this time. Now, the first session is, what does the world offer when it talks about well-being? And we can't begin without first checking that we all have the same view as to what well-being means. And at the start, you were invited to think about what you thought it meant, what that term means to you. And don't worry if you found that hard, you're in great company, because it really is quite confusing. And I'll explain why I think that is. It's all to do with mental health. Now, when I began work as a consultant psychiatrist in 1989, I was working in a mental illness unit. But a few years later, although I was doing exactly the same thing, I was working in a mental health unit. And the reason for the change was partly, I think, there was a hope that if we were looking towards the positive mental health, it would have a different feel than if we're focusing on the negative, the ill health. But also a hope that somehow this would reduce the stigma around mental illness and make it easier for people to access our service. I think that was a bit optimistic, I have to say. But then the problem is, if mental health becomes a euphemism for mental ill health, then when people talk about mental health, it's not clear what's meant. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing? Because actually it's ill health people are mentioning. And then if well-being gets tangled up in that too, that becomes even more problematic. And I'm going to start showing some PowerPoint slides for the rest of this talk to explain what I think the issues are here. So here we have the Warwick-Edinburgh Mental Wellbeing Scale. So the government commissioned academics to come up with a scale so that they could monitor the well-being of our society. And they link good mental well-being to positive mental health. So they're clearly seeing the two as being linked. Now, I think there's a problem with that. And that's this, that if you focus on mental well-being as relating to health, it's very much focused on the individual. And the danger might be an expectation that it's up to me to maintain my well-being. That is to ignore the influence of social and environmental factors on our well-being as well as on our mental health. And so for me, that approach is too narrow. Rather, I think it's more helpful to think of mental health and well-being as two distinct but related dimensions. And I'm going to explain that. I will also be giving you a link to a video produced by Student Minds that explains it very well, and you might want to look at that after this session. I have to say that not everyone distinguishes mental health and well-being the way I do, but the fact that they do too encourages me. So here we are. You'll see there's a vertical axis of well-being, and there's a horizontal axis, which here I've related to mental health challenges, but it could equally be social challenges too. And I want us to imagine that we are thinking of somebody who has, let's say, bipolar disorder. That means that their mood can go up and down. So at the beginning of the year, they may have been in a place where their well-being was good, their health was good, and they'd be in the top left-hand corner. Then along comes the coronavirus and the implications of that in terms of lockdown. And as they're isolating themselves, then their well-being drops, but they haven't become unwell. That would take them to the bottom left-hand corner. But now, let's imagine this person becomes high. Now, they may lose insight. They may not be aware that they're unwell, so they might think that their mental health is fine, and they would think their well-being is superb because they feel on top of the world. Stephen Fry describes this very well and talks of spending a fortune when he's high on DVDs. He might say at that point that he's in the top right-hand corner. Or rather, other people would say that. He would say, oh, no, I'm in the top left-hand corner. My mental health is fine. But if that person becomes depressed, it's likely it would pull their well-being down also, and then they'll be in the bottom right-hand corner. So you can see how the two are linked. But if you can maintain your well-being, even if facing mental health or social challenges, it will reduce the impact of those challenges and might indeed stop you being tipped into an episode of illness. Let me explain this relationship another way. I like cycling, but I'm a bit of a fair weather cyclist, to be fair. I like cycling in good weather. I like to have a good view, and I don't mind a few little hills. That's good for me, but not too much. Now, if I'm expected to climb a steeper hill, my well-being starts to go down. And if it's raining or the wind's blowing against me, I tell you, I am completely miserable. But I recognise that if I were fitter, the hills wouldn't bother me quite so much. You know, if I was a sort of Tour de France cyclist, I would be able to maintain my well-being, probably even in bad weather, but certainly on steep hills. I'd merely regard that as a challenge. My attitude to the difficulty would be different, and I'd cope with it better. So that's not saying that it's easy to maintain well-being in all circumstances, but it is saying that it is possible to do so. The second point I'd like to make is that if we only focus on, say, mental health challenges or the social challenge, it limits our opportunities to do something. Because I've said that our well-being relates to those challenges, if we find ways of maintaining our well-being, that is going to lessen the risk of those challenges bringing us down. And the third point I want to make is that well-being doesn't equate with happiness. It's about maintaining well-being even in difficult circumstances, even in the situation we find ourselves in now. So we need a definition of well-being that's not linked to mental health. And here's my current definition. I have no doubt I may change it in time, and if you come up with a better one, let me know. But what I'm saying is that well-being is a subjective assessment of contentment with ourselves. It's a belief that our lives have meaning and an ability to respond well to our circumstances, to others and the created world. And our well-being is impacted by external factors. I've deliberately chosen a definition that can be used by everyone, and in due course we'll see what that looks like from a Christian perspective. You'll see in that definition I've really emphasised meaning and how we respond. And Viktor Frankl, who was in a concentration camp during the war, wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. And in that he writes that those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. That those who have a why to live can bear with almost any how. So there's something about having meaning that helps maintain well-being. The other issue is this sense of autonomy of the choices that we make as to how we view our situation and respond. And Frankl said, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, I've deliberately started by thinking of the secular perspective of well-being, and I think that's really important because we're immersed in that culture and it is bound to influence us. I think it looks a little like this. I need to feel happy because society tells me I should be able to. I need to have my basic needs met. Well, that's fair enough. And it would be hard to have well-being if you were going hungry or you didn't have a roof over your head. I need my wants met as well as my needs. So I should have the things that I want. And furthermore, I should have what you tell me I should want. So we have a society that tells us what our expectations should look like. It's a society that is informed by a materialist culture that wants us to be good consumers, but we'll only consume if we feel we've got an unmet need. So it always leaves us with a sense of desire for something more and an incompleteness until we get it. And of course, that can never be satisfied. Now, I think that we have a lot to learn from, if you like, a secular perspective and scientific literature around well-being, and much of that has come from the United States. Our government commissioned a report back in 2008 on mental well-being, how to make the most of ourselves in the 21st century. And they found evidence to support what they felt were the 5 key practices to well-being, which we're going to come on to. The report, though, was much more than that. It placed strong emphasis on the socio-economic issues that impact on well-being and the relevance of these different issues across the lifespan. What it failed to mention in 317 pages is anything really about faith and spirituality. So coming back to these 5 ways to well-being, they describe them and offer some brief suggestions. And we're going to look at them. And as we do, you may want to be reflecting on what you do in each of those categories that helps with your well-being. So the first is connect. Now there they only describe a social dimension. Who do you connect with and where? We, of course, would want to include connecting with God. And also, how do we connect with our environment? Connecting may be a real problem for many of us just now. I live on my own and I feel incredibly hug and touch deprived. And I'm sure you're all feeling the difficulties of having that aspect of well-being so challenged at present. The second way to well-being is being active, which recognises that our bodies are important. And they suggest walking, running, cycling and dancing. But of course, there are many other ways, and some of those are made more difficult, aren't they? Like going to the gym or an exercise class, although some are available online. And of course, being active needs to be tailored to our mobility and level of fitness. I want to throw you a bit of a challenge now. Can you think a way of combining physical exercise with a Christian-based practice? And if you can, you might want to share it in the chat so that we can all benefit from it, because there's not that much about that in the literature. The third way is taking notice, being aware of our environment, being curious, catching sight of the beautiful, remarking on the unusual, the report says. It's noticing the changing seasons, and it's savouring the moment. It's very much about living in the present. So this is where they do take note of the impact of the environment on our well-being. And we, in taking notice, might also be taking notice of what is God prompting us to see. So again, it would link us up with connecting, for example. All of these ways are interlinked. The fourth way is to keep learning something new. What new hobby or interest could you develop? And of course, at present, we do have more time on our hands, many of us, and that opportunity to do so. And you may feel that coming to these sessions will count as your learning for Advent. I hope so. And finally, they suggest giving. And that giving doesn't have to be giving something like a present. It's also giving a smile, or giving of our time, or giving a listening ear. And we as Christians would recognize, as we say in the offertory prayer, that we give what God first gave us. And I think that takes us on to the sixth way of well-being, the one they didn't mention, but I have got a balloon for it, and that's give thanks. The Bible urges us to have a spirit of gratitude, of being aware of what we're really thankful for. And that helps us focus on the positive. Our brains have a tendency to focus and dwell on the negative, and giving thanks is a superb counterbalance. The research evidence shows that if you keep a gratitude journal, and you write in it for, say, 15 minutes a day, a few days a week, not every day, so it mustn't become a chore, because then you wouldn't be grateful, but just a few days a week, within a few weeks, your level of well-being will have improved. And that's something that you might want to try. I think that looking back over the day and seeing what you're grateful for helps you as you enter the next day to be looking for those things that you're going to give thanks for later on that day. Now, all of these ways to well-being are good, and there's biblical evidence that would support each one of them. My concern, though, is that it's all focused on action, what we can do. Secondly, it's all about what I need to do for my well-being. And it doesn't suggest that individually and together we should be campaigning for social justice for those factors that the report says impacts on our well-being. And yet God would say that we should. And lastly, as I've said, it says nothing, even in the examples it gives for the ways to well-being, that touch on spirituality and faith. So I think this approach is fine, but it's not sufficient. It doesn't take us far enough. In the next session, we are going to start with the theology of well-being, and we'll see where we then end up.